Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Shure Axient Digital for Backline. Today, we're joined by several Shure employees as well as some special guests. So we've got Ben Escobedo, who's part of our Shure market development team. Jen Liang Shabu is with Shure Entertainment Relations. Myself, Ryan Smith, Shure Artist Relations, and Mr. Michael Johns is a product manager at Shure. And also joining us today, we have the honor of being joined by Side Phil Robinson, who's a monitor engineer with Kenny Chesney, and Terry Fox, who handles guitar, bass, and keyboard tech with Kenny Chesney. So looking forward to having a great afternoon today, and thank you all for joining us. I'm going to kick it over to Jen Liang Shabu, who's going to get us started.
All right, cool. So thanks for joining us. We're really excited to do this webinar, especially since we have some awesome guests with us. To kick everything off, I just wanted to let you all know that we're going to go through a quick overview of the Axient Digital system, which is the system that Phil and Terry have been using, and talk about some of the features as it relates to backline and instrument wireless. So we'll kick it off here, and then we'll talk about how everybody's using it. So the first thing I want to mention is Axient Digital. It's our top of the line wireless system, brand new digital audio and RF architecture. There's a couple of different types of transmitters that go with it. So you see the AD and ADX. We'll talk about that in a second. But let's talk about the receiver first. So when you're looking at the Axient receiver, there's two different types of receivers. Feature-wise, they're very similar, and it's basically one wideband receiver that you're working with. So you have native Dante, you have AES, you have analog out, antenna cascading, and a 4-port switch. So you can network your wireless, and you'll see why in a minute, because we have some really cool software that works great with this. And then there's the dual receiver. So functionality-wise, regardless of which receiver you're going with, the only key differences you have is a feature called quadversity, which we really won't be talking about today because that has to do with antenna zones. But the dual receiver, if you look at the back panel, has a separate AES output. So if you want to run analog and AES at the same time, you're going to go with the dual receiver. And you see with the quad receiver here, we have to reuse the XLR ports for AES, so we can't do both at the same time.
For that, one of the things I'll mention to you, and this is Michael John speaking, is that while you can't use the analog XLRs at the same time as you use AES, you can use the 6.3 or quarter-inch output. So if there's a need to have some redundancy between AES and analog, you could do that via the XLRs for AES and the quarter-inch outs for analog redundancy.
So let's jump in here and let's talk about some of the frequency ranges you have. So when you're looking at these slides, the frequency ranges at the top, G57, G54, and X55, what those are referring to are your transmitter bands. What's really cool about this particular system is that the receivers are actually wider tuning. So it actually allows you, if you're moving to different regions, like if you're on a world tour, for instance, you can have different transmitter band models for those particular countries. So in the green box is mostly what you're going to be using because it requires a license to be into the K54 and X55 ranges. The green G57 transmitter, that receiver is actually called the A receiver. So that's what you'll be looking at when you're specifying the system. So let's talk about a couple really cool features that we have with Axient Digital. The first thing that we have is this thing called the Q meter, and that's brand new. It's really great in that it actually gives you an idea of what your signal to noise ratio is. So right now, if you didn't have a quality meter, you see RF lights on your receiver, which is great. It means the receiver is seeing RF. However, if somebody comes in on top of your frequency or you have a really high noise floor, you actually don't see that. You'll see your transmitter probably because the signal strength is stronger, but then what it's going to translate to is less range because the noise floor is higher. And if you turned your transmitter off, oh, what, my goodness, I'm seeing like 3 bars of RF lights, right? So that's no longer a good frequency. The awesome thing about the Q meter is you'll see like one or 2 lights on the quality meter, and then I have a high noise floor. I'm not going to get as good range as I would otherwise. In addition, if you flip that around, if you have a quality meter of 5 bars, looks great. You have a really strong signal to noise, really strong RF link, and you're only seeing like a couple bars on the RF meters. What that translates to is to like a nice low noise floor, but you're probably hitting towards the end range as far as your walk from your antennas. So that's something to keep in mind, to work together with the RF meters and the Q meter. The other thing we have is this new property called transmitter authentication. And what this system allows you to do is to actually register your transmitters via IR-Sync. And you can register up to 8 transmitters per receiver channel. That's important because it gives the receiver a list, basically like a keep out bouncer list that it works with. So if it sees a transmitter come in, it knows whether or not it's an approved transmitter on that list. And you can actually set the receiver to block unauthorized transmitters. So that way your receiver will never open up and pass audio for a rogue transmitter if somebody else brings in something on your frequency. So it gives you some extra protection so you don't have unexpected things coming out your PA. In addition, which you're probably not going to use for music all that much, but it is there, and there's no latency and no audio impact. It has AES 256-bit encryption. We are actually seeing some artists want to do this on their wireless systems, so you can feel free to do so, and that's also a feature of that system. So let's talk about transmitters for a minute. There's actually kind of a choose your own adventure situation with the way our transmitters work. So there's the AD style transmitters, which is going to be the pretty typical transmitter to receiver. Like if you use UHFR or ULXT, it's going to feel really similar to that. You can see a picture of the body pack in the handheld here. Works with AA batteries or our SB900 rechargeable battery. And the body pack is available in LEMO termination or TA4F, depending on which variety is preferred for you. And then, of course, we have a handheld. Now, moving up from that, we have the ADX series transmitters. And what's really cool about the ADX transmitters is it adds a new functionality that we call ShowLink. And what ShowLink is real-time remote control of your transmitter. So you no longer have to be that person running out on stage to change a frequency or anything. You can actually make that change from the receiver or from the software. So it really saves you a lot of time, both in setup, but also if you have an issue that you're trying to work with. Body pack as well, LEMO termination or TA4F termination. And these particular transmitters are rechargeable only. So each transmitter actually comes with 2 rechargeable batteries to work with. And then we also have a micro body pack, and this is super tiny. It was actually made with like theater and like hiding in mind. This is also ShowLink compatible, so it does have that real-time remote control. It has an internal antenna, as you can see in the picture. So it's LEMO only with a recessed mic jack, so that way you don't have to worry about breakage or poking of the artist. And it's also made of a plastic that's for heat dissipation in mind. So if you're actually putting it on someone, it doesn't get hot or they don't feel it. Really slick little piece. I will say when you're talking about the body packs, you have a variety of different ways to work. When you're working with this micro body pack, it's actually made with an internal self-calibrating antenna, which measures transmitter load. So normally you put a transmitter on, human skin, you'll see the radiating power decrease because we absorb RF. So this actually can measure that load and electrically retune the antenna to compensate for that, which makes it really well tuned for wearing on a person. Whereas like if you're putting something on a guitar strap, having an external antenna radiating into free space, which is actually how these antennas are designed, the open air antennas, that is actually a better choice for you for your guitars and instruments and whatnot. So let's talk about some of the accessories that you kind of need for the system to make work. First of all, chargers. So there's a variety of different chargers that you can work with the system. You see in the upper right, we have our SBRC charger. That's actually a rack mountable charger. And each of those 4 bays you can switch out for whatever style of transmitter that you're working with. We have tray style chargers. The 840M, that's a micro body pack charger. So that's for that tiny body pack. And then we also have slot in chargers, which is that 240 that you see right there. For those of you who haven't worked with Shure's rechargeable technology before, we do make our own batteries. What's really cool about our batteries is there's a chip inside them that keeps track of its history. So you can actually read off like how many charge cycles, what its capacity looks like, what its age looks like. And it also allows you, when this is a feature that once you have, it's just like, it's hard to, if you don't ever have it, is we can actually give you an hour and minute readout as far as like how much life you have left in your transmitter, which is a heck of a lot nicer to be looking at than, 2 bars and how long have I been there, right? So that's our smart battery technology, 50% to charge in 1 hour and 100% in 3 hours if the battery is fully dead. So let's talk about cables for a second. So we have a variety of different Shure cables available. We do recommend with digital wireless that you want to use well-shielded instrument cables. The reason for that being is most digital wireless systems, Axient Digital included, does have both an FM and an AM component. If you're not well shielded, AM can get into the electronics. So the reason we bring that up is we've been making pretty well shielded cables for probably the last at least 4 or 5 years, but there's a lot of cables out there that you're working with. So keep that in mind if you have an old cable and you're hearing a little bit of hiss in the sound, that can be a shielding issue. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. And I think Ben's going to talk a little bit about how to terminate your own cables for those of you who are making your own cables. But here's a list of our cables in particular. We also have a specialty cable that's specifically for LEMO. That is the WA308 and then the WA309, depending on if you want a right angle instrument cable. It's important that you actually use our cable because there's some electronics in the cable, specifically to the body pack. So just having a general LEMO terminated cable won't actually work correctly. So I talked about it a little bit before with regards to the transmitters. The AD610 access point. This is the piece of equipment that you need in order to have the transmitter remote control. So if you're doing transmitter remote control, you add this to your network. This will control up to 24 transmitters, and it's a diversity antenna situation. So it powers over PoE, so you can plug it into the Axient Digital receiver, has 2 PoE ports. You have a PoE switch, that's fine too. Any of that works just fine for that. You can also extend your range by adding additional access points. So if you're trying to like cover a dressing room or like backstage or something, so you want to make sure those packs are on, even if you don't necessarily need RF, you can throw one of these access points down there and pick up basically all the features that you would see for your transmitters. So just to reiterate, the one thing with ShowLink is when you IR sync your receiver, your transmitter to your receiver, they form a link together. So anytime you're making those changes, you can do that on the receiver or in the software. If you make a frequency change, for instance, that frequency change will pass to the transmitter via the ShowLink access point. And you can do any of these settings in real time, including RF mute. All right, so let's talk about this optional piece, which is a really powerful unit. This is the AXT600. So this actually serves as basically like your frequency boss, effectively. So it is a scanning tool. You can do a wideband scan. And what you do is you upload your frequency list to the AXT600. The AXT600 at that point goes into a backup frequency monitoring mode. And it's just going to constantly spot check all of those backup frequencies in the list and then rank them over time. When you have this networked with your Axient Digital system, it allows it to have somewhere to pull a frequency that it knows is good because it's constantly evaluating those frequencies. And that brings us to the feature set of RF interference detection and avoidance. So the way this works is you're going to network up your receivers, network that up with a single spectrum manager, which has that frequency list that you've coordinated, and it lives in that AXT600 hardware. So when the receiver has interference and feels like it has a bad frequency, what it'll do is say like, hey, AXT600, I need a new frequency. It's going to give that bad frequency to the 600, and then the 600 will pass on that good frequency to the receiver, and then the receiver will pass it to the transmitter. I know that took a long time to explain. That happens in 100 milliseconds. It's super fast. So basically you have your one initial RF bump, and then you're on a new frequency and you're going. And so it doesn't interrupt your show. So let's talk about software. Now we have two software options available. The one really cool one works for Mac and PC, is our wireless workbench software. We're going to bring up that software in a little bit so you can see some of the timeline tools for monitoring. You can also use that to coordinate your frequencies. We're not going to dive into software on this particular one, but I do want to make sure that you see it and know some of the, especially the timeline logging is super helpful. Also, if you're more of a phone app person, we have this really cool software called Channels. It's iOS only at this moment. But what it does allow you to do is if you set up a Wi-Fi access point, and that's an additional piece that you would add on your own, you can connect to your hardware on your phone or on your iPad, which is nice for kind of walking around and looking at things. It does require going to the Apple App Store. It's a free download for monitoring. If you do want to control any of the gear, I think it's $9.99 per gear type. So if you only have Axient Digital, then it's just basically $10, and you can change parameters in the iOS app as well. So any particular questions about, I know that was a quick overview. We want to talk more in depth about some workflow things, especially now that we have Bill and Terry on the line. And feel free, if you haven't used the GoToWebinar before, throw your questions up in chat. So I'm going to stop sharing this so we can get everybody's camera back.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. We had a couple questions pop up on the platform here, and I think it would probably be good to go into more granular detail about what's going on with the receiver itself. Basically, the first question came up, and it was about the Q and what is going on with the Q meter, and also where where you can see that information. So I'm going to try to see if we can do that here. And there it is. All right. So if we're looking here on a Axient Digital receiver, I think we should all be able to see it. You see the 4 channels, and mainly on the main screen, if you exit all the way out, you see your 4 different channels of a quad. And then you will see what we're all used to, the Shure RSSI, or Receive Signal Strength Indication, basically how much RF is coming through the link. And then in classic Shure fashion, you see the blue light and everything is good. If there's a problem, the blue light turns red, and we've had this around for quite a while. Now, the Q meter in more detail is more of an early warning of how well your system is doing. Based on the carry to noise ratio and some other factors, it is a confidence level of how your system is performing. The Q can go from 1 to 5, with 5 being the best. So if you click on the channel you're working with first, we can see the Q here on the main screen with the 5 vertical dots, meaning everything is running great and the system is performing 100%. Now, if the Q starts declining, it's because of 2 factors. It's either there's another interfering signal on top of your frequency that's causing your signal not to be understood very well, or perhaps that your guitar player or instrument is getting out of range. It's an early warning that you can be confident of how well your system is performing. So the question that came in was, where can I see the Q? And you can see it in a couple different places, but first off, you can see it on each channel strip in the vertical dots. However, if you're a guitar tech and you want to see everything in one shot, there are a bunch of different displays here on the main screen where you can see up to 4 channels or all 4 channels, and there's that little Q5 there next to the kind of show link, looks like a Wi-Fi icon, and that will show you the Q. And other views as well, if you scroll over, you can see the Q in a horizontal fashion, so at a glance you can see. It's a little bit difficult to get used to because we're so used to looking at the RSSI, or the actual signal strength, to be sure that our system is working. But in reality, the Q meter is much more valuable as an indication of how your system is performing than the RSSI. So I just wanted to show that there. The other thing that came up is kind of an advanced function. And I know Jen was talking about the interference detection and avoidance. And on each channel, you should be able to set on the advanced menu all the way at the bottom, you can set your interference management. And it asks what you want to do when your system detects interference. So there's a couple options here. The first one is off, which is not recommended. So you definitely want to know if interference is there. If you put it on manual, basically it'll come up and say, hey, there's interference here, and let you know if you want to do something about it. And then automatic will, if you have a spectrum manager, will automatically change the frequencies for you, which is the cool functionality of that. In addition, the question came up was, what do you do with the unregistered transmitter action? Basically, you would say, if you have another Axient Digital pack comes up on this frequency, what do you want to do with it? And you can allow it to let it through. You could warn it and say, hey, it's coming through, but give you a warning message, or block. Block just says, hey, I'm going to not accept that unregistered transmitter, even if it is Axient Digital in my frequency. And if recommended, if you're going to be using the interference detection and avoidance, would be to set the detection on automatic and then the unregistered on block. So it just, anything comes in that frequency, it's just going to try to get out of the way and move to a new frequency. But I figured I'd just address those questions there quickly, especially with the Q, because it's a new concept to people, and when we're moving from analog, it's something to get used to, and it's really important to kind of understand.
Just to familiarize everyone with the Shure lingo, when we say registration, we're talking about syncing the transmitter to the receiver. And it's called registration versus syncing because you can actually register up to 8 transmitters to one receiver channel, which is really pertinent for this conversation with backline techs, right? Because a lot of times you may be using 2 or 3 guitars on the same receiver channel and doing changeovers by turning on and off packs. You can keep the interference setting to block and ensure that no rogue transmitters will pass audio. And as you're doing those handovers, each transmitter that's associated to a single channel are all on the receiver channel's whitelist, if you will.
Excellent.
This particular slide, when we were talking about transmitter registration, so this is actually what you see on the receiver. So you actually have a list of up to 8 transmitters that you can sync into multiple slots. So it's pretty common to use one receiver channel and one frequency and share it between multiple instruments. So this is how you would do that. And there's a lot of really great warnings built in. So for instance, if you turn on 2 transmitters that are your, synced, authorized, registered transmitters, you'll actually get a very specific warning that you have multiple transmitters active. And then from the receiver, especially if you have a show link transmitter, you can just mute the transmitter that you don't want to be on and then turn the RF on the other one. So it's pretty flexible in the way you can work with this.
Cool. All right, I think at this time I'm going to shift gears a little bit and kind of talk with Phil and Terry about their experiences with Axient Digital. And again, thanks for joining us today and sharing your workflow and how you're using the equipment. First off, what are you guys actually using on the tour? What gear and what models are you using?
We're using, we've got about 28 channels of 84Q on tour and 16 channels of PSM 1000. And we're not using all that at once. There's some J8 and some G10 that we swap around depending on what the RF landscape is from day to day. The J8's more of a backup stuff, but the G10 is a day-to-day thing. I just wanted to touch on, you were talking about the transmitter list, and I was wanting to add to that. You're talking about having multiple instruments. It's a great place to talk about the mic offset. If you're trying to match up levels on different instruments to that single channel of receiver, that mic offset inside the 81 or 80X one is a great place to match up the level of your instruments.
I'm glad you brought that up, Terry. The mic offset, for those that don't know, is a feature on the transmitter pack itself. And basically it allows, like Terry was saying, to adjust the differences between like a very hot output guitar, something maybe with active pickups or humbuckers versus a single coil that may be quieter. If you're not adjusting it to do the same level, you should leave it at 0. It's often mistaken as a traditional gain. And for those that aren't aware, Axient Digital has an automatic gain. There really is no more gain control on the front end. So mic offset shouldn't be treated as a traditional gain or sensitivity control, as some manufacturers call it. You're only really using it, like as Terry was saying, to match up levels and so forth.
As Ben mentioned, our transmitters have a gain ranging front end, and we do this via a technique of stacking 2 AD converters, ADD converters together, and we get in excess of 130 dB of dynamic range. So if you're using a microphone, like an SM58, you're more than likely to clip the capsule before you can clip the front end. So there's no need to adjust the gain at all. But realizing that a lot of our users come from a legacy analog standpoint, that's definitely not the case with analog, right? Because when you're talking about analog modulation, you want the signal to be fully deviated, which means you want to turn up the gain as much as you can before it starts to clip. Totally not the case with digital. We've made it simple, but sometimes people misuse that mic offset, assuming that it's gain. It's actually exactly for what Terry mentioned. It's for level matching between 2 different instruments, or if you outside of Backline, if you have an artist who uses a handheld for one song and uses a headset for another song, you might need to have a level match there. That's really what it's for. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, Terry. It's a good use of mic offset.
Absolutely. So Terry and Phil, what were you guys using before Axient Digital?
We had the Axient, the original Axient on Kenny's vocal mic. Everything else was the standard UHF stuff that all Shure. We've been on PSM 1000s for probably, what, 5 years, Terry? 6 years?
Yeah.
Awesome.
And so it's pretty much been a Shure package. And the reason for that is really Workbench. There are a lot of other programs out there that have started coming into the market that do this, but you guys were the original. And not having a dedicated frequency coordinator on tour, it made it possible to do what we do. I mean, all the way back to the Shure 700s and 600s. I mean, there were some evil RF days back then. And when Workbench come on, everything just got a little more understandable and a lot more usable.
So you're integrating Workbench with not only PSM and Axient Digital, but you're using it for your main vocal mics as well. It's like the whole ecosystem, basically.
Yes.
Right?
And if you don't work together, you get in big trouble because there's just so much going on with opening acts and the venues and the RF that's happening all around you everywhere that you have to be one cohesive group.
You and Phil and Terry, you guys work together all the time to make sure that your frequencies are on point and PSM's not interfering with your vocal mics and all that kind of thing, right?
Correct. I have the computer with Workbench on it in my area that I'm linked to everything across the stage. We have them. We have, it's kind of unconventional. We have wireless units all over the place, but they're all networked together. So it really doesn't matter where they're at. I can see everything comes up on the inventory list on my computer, and it's all controlled from right there.
That's awesome. So when you say you're controlling it, are you using ShowLink to control your microphones and guitar wireless as well?
I'm just starting to do, Phil's had it in his world. It showed up in Workbench, of course, but Phil has had it in Monitor World, and I say in his world because I'm stage right and he's stage left, but the Workbench controls all of it. But we're just getting into it whenever we got shut down this year because of the virus, but we're just getting into the ADX1s and being frequency agile. It was amazing when the AD1s came about, and it was still great technology. We loved it and just love working with it and just how robust it is with the ever-changing RF landscape. Everywhere you go, it's just getting worse and worse. But it makes it so easy between the Axient and wireless Workbench. It's if I was in a band that had two wirelesses, I would hook up my computer and wireless Workbench, and because it's just so easy.
Have you has the ShowLink saved you time, like for setup and that sort of thing when you're getting there, setting up your gear, changing parameters?
It was good just to go in because I could when it turned on a transmitter and it was in the transmitter list for that particular channel, I could access it in the monitor section of wireless Workbench, and I could go real time while we're working on stuff and name it. If we need to do mic offset stuff, I got one guitar player that uses 5 different guitars, and so we would just sit there and I could do the mic offset, so he didn't have to fill with the pack while we were actually, and it just streamlines everything, having ShowLink and those packs that talk to it. It's amazing. And
yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, once they're established, like once that link is made to that particular channel, if you change the receiver or when you get to a new gig or venue, the packs automatically change. You don't have to infrared sync each one, right?
And that's one thing we're really excited about our workflow changing every day, because when I come up with a solution on Workbench, if we were on a festival, then the guys would be running around trying to sync their packs, and now all I have to do is say, "Guy, just turn your packs on and we're ready to play." So awesome. It's something else. It's amazing.
And if you don't have a frequency coordinator on tour, Terry did something this year that's really great for us as techs across the board. Whatever you do, we had a wireless day to where not only did we show everybody what we're using, how we're using it, and kind of a general how it works, but the setup process, because there's different words that we use now that aren't in gain, and that they're offsets, and there's pads, and you have to put it in the list, and this is what the list means. And that takes a while to not only do, but to teach everybody you can't just do it the old way. Now you have this simple protocol that you have to do.
That's great. So, I mean, it seems like a lot of great features and making your life easier, that sort of thing. What can you tell us about how the guitar players and bass players feel about the sound quality over analog and the migration? And Terry, in your world with the output, I'm assuming you're using 1/4-inch TS output to amplifiers, possibly modelers, and that sort of thing. Can you describe a little bit about the connectivity and the type of equipment that you're using, or does it constantly change, or
It's mostly 1/4-inch. There's because of our setup and of course Kenny, everybody has to be wireless on the Kenny tour, but there's a lot of wires to be wireless, as you know. So A lot of times for the pedal boards, we'll run balance out of an Axient system and to the pedal board balanced, and then unbalance it to run through the pedal chain, and then 1/4 inch back to the amp. But it's balanced out of the unit to the pedal board, and that just helps you with just signal, just a cleaner signal to there.
Oh, that's great. And I know like kind of a negative point sometimes people discuss, but have you experienced like any noise issues or things with vintage guitars or older non-shielded wiring acoustic guitars specifically? Anything like that?
It was more last year. We had some problems with the guy, John Conley, who plays. He plays multiple instruments, but he's mainly the acoustic player. We had some trouble with his, and I think Phil, I don't remember. I think we just fooled with the gain finally, with gains to make it.
It was gains and some ground lifting on the vintage gear. It's always a troubleshoot shotgun when it comes to vintage amplifiers, because they're so specially made and hand wound, and they're all special and old, and it just takes a little fiddling to figure out what they want to see, since they're all built off of cable and 1960s technology, 70s technology. So there's been a lot of trial and error on that, but we found that if we can get separation between the pedal board and the amp, we have a lot of that cleaned up. And of course, the Axient stuff, there's almost never any noise there. We have, since we run balance, we can use the ground switch now, which allows us to cut some of that out and to help a little bit. It's been a little bit of trouble. It seems like there's always that one piece on stage, and every stage has it. That's going to be that troublesome thing. But once you figure it out, it seems to be good to go.
It's awesome.
We did have some problems with Kenny's acoustic and noise with the Axient, but it wound up just being a gain thing with the guitar, because that particular Takamine preamp has a 12AX7 in it, and
well,
anyway.
we did drop down to 2 milliwatts on that too. Running high power on those packs seemed to amplify that issue, and putting in more antennas up with the Quadversity and the different systems we've got really helps to turn that power down on the pack and just put up more receivers, more antennas to catch it.
Gotcha. So you mentioned Quadversity. Are you guys using Quadversity
We
on
are on
stage?
Kenny's mic and his guitar. Most of the handheld mics we're using Quadversity. The way that we're spread out across the stage, it's very difficult to run Quadversity everywhere, because you need so many distribution amplifiers and cabling, and the more cable you add, the more dBs you lose in the RF world. And so we try to keep it as minimal as possible, but we've got a lot of things, a lot of antenna placements that kind of cover everything. And then of course, we've got the hot settable antennas for the new Shure active antennas, where you can flip them on the go, and that gives us a lot of diversity in what we set up and use.
That's great. And Terry, a question for you about your workflow from switching guitars. Are you're using transmitter registration and assigning multiple instrument packs to a single channel? Are you using the activate function to switch, or are you using a standard guitar switcher? What's your workflow like for that?
For me, I just have Harmony, who plays bass, and we have 2 basses, identical pickups, identical setup, identical strings, everything. And basically they're both tuned now. This year they're tuned to 1 channel, and if something goes haywire on a bass, all she has to do is turn one wireless off and the other one on, and it's same gain, same sound, same everything. So for her, that's basically all I'm doing there. I've got 2 transmitters registered on the receiver, and it's a done deal. Kenny's acoustic, he has an acoustic and a backup acoustic, and I have him set up on a switcher, and both of those channels stay hot at the same time. So Catfish, who texts for Kenny, can just swap those guitars out so they both stay hot all the time, and they check levels all the time on those, and they're switched in his world. The output of the Axient is switched to fill by Catfish should there be a problem. So, and then stage left, he's the one I was talking about who uses like 5 or 6 guitars, and he basically transmitter off and hand a new guitar, the transmitter on. So, and then we've got the 2 guys on stage right. They put their belt pack in their pocket, and they play different guitars all night long on the same belt pack. So we do it every way you can do it.
Oh, that's awesome. They're just using the same pack and switching out the guitars, and that's the deal.
No matter how many guitars or what guitar it is, they're switching guitars and just plugging in whatever comes out. That's what goes to the amp.
That's great. On the packs, we offer them in both. I know you guys are using the ADX1, but we have both LEMO and TA4F. Which connector are you guys using?
It's the TA4F, I believe, with the little push button.
Yep, the little mini XLR kind of thing. Yeah. Okay.
And cool. We have the nice little the sleeves that screw onto
the locking
sleeves. Yeah,
that's essential, isn't it?
Yeah.
Definitely. So of course, going to the digital packs like the ADX1, you guys had to use rechargeable batteries because the ADX1. What has been your experience with that, and what's your workflow like as far as using the batteries?
Well, it's so far it's amazing how long those things last. And like I said, we're only in rehearsals, but it's like days. They last for days in rehearsal. It's pretty amazing. So I'm excited to get them on the road and try them.
And we did have on a little bit different of a subject. We did have an issue with Kenny and his ear packs. A lot of sweat on stage, a lot of running, a lot of running about and all that stuff. He was killing the packs on his ear pack, and we were running alkaline AA's, Duracells, normal thing. And we moved to your rechargeable battery, and the higher current of that seemed to fix the problem. So since we've been on the Axient stuff, we've been on the rechargeable pretty much exclusively. We've had no issues with water or high humidity or anything like that killing a pack. So whatever that has done has been a great asset to the show.
Cool.
Question, if I can ask Terry a question before we get too far away from your workflow of doing changeovers. In the transmitter list in Axient Digital, you can automatically mute or unmute all of your other channels by activating a transmitter. I'm just wondering, how does your changeover normally work when you go from transmitter to transmitter? If you could maybe describe that for everyone.
I know that Zeke, the stage left guy that has all the guitars, Clay is the guitar player, Zeke is the tech. They have their system worked out where Clay likes to turn his own pack on. So he'll hand Zeke a pack and Zeke will turn it off, but Clay likes to turn his pack on. So that's basically all it is. It's one off, one on. And they have their, they have their routine down how they do it. And they don't, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just to jump in. What's interesting to note is that if he ever forgot to, I'm sure he wouldn't, but if he were ever to forget to flip that transmitter on, that's probably the only drawback. But it seems like a really simple, easy to remember workflow.
Yeah, they have that. It's more the other way where Zeke will be busy and forget to turn one off. And I immediately, it comes up on my monitor and I run across stage and screaming, turn that belt pack off, and it goes down. So
and now with the Axient stuff, he can do that from his screen. He can mute the RF on that and go take care of it.
It's cool. So you guys are both set up with Workbench at your own stations, looking at all the gear at one time, and you have complete visibility on 2 computers simultaneously. That's right.
I don't run a computer in Monitor World. There's too many other screens going on at this point. And since Terry's really just monitoring that, watching the guys on stage, kind of take care of that. I do have the spectrum analyzer behind me that gives me all kinds of messages. And I usually run channel on the desk. And now that that's got a few more features, it's really nice to be able to just monitor what's going on. And I can get with Terry and make any changes I need, or just change them on the front of the unit itself. And it'll show him on his Workbench, hey, he did this. sometimes I get a hateful look from stage right going, hey, you changed something you weren't supposed to. But hey,
Of course.
boss man's got to be heard.
Absolutely. So when you guys get to a new venue or a new place, what's your approach to frequency coordination? I mean, you have in-ear monitors, you've got wireless microphones, you got wireless instrument packs. What is like the first? Where do you put things in the spectrum, and what's your general workflow of what you try to do, if you can, of course?
On a shed or an amphitheater day, usually those are tighter for us as far as when we get the stage. And usually I can't set up wireless workbench and antennas and do a scan until we get stuff moved onto stage. So I have a spectrum analyzer, a handheld, and I use Vantage, and I'll take and put that software into Vantage, create a file, and then I can load that into Workbench. And if I have time, I'll run a Workbench scan and compare them. But if not, I can load that right into Workbench as soon as I can get my computer fired up, and I can go ahead and work on a coordination. But as far as where I put things, I'm only using about, I think 40, 45 frequencies including backups. So knock on wood, I mean, I really don't have a problem with where of having to separate stuff or using inclusion lists, or I just let Workbench put it wherever it wants to put it, and that's usually that's successful for me. For us,
well, we spend a lot of time in the setup too on Workbench, finding TV channels and setting all of it up. And we found that, you know, it's good to look at, but it's more important to do a raw scan and then take out what you don't need, because sometimes the TV station is in your area, but it's not really transmitting something that will affect you. So we'll place a wireless frequency right on top of that sucker because we need it.
Absolutely, that's a great point. I mean, what's in the databases, especially currently right now, is not often what's really in reality. Or, as you mentioned, the building shielding or the venue shielding can totally, change your perspective of what's actually coming through the thing.
And we store every scan we have, and with that scan, we can look back. Hey, we're going to the Rose Bowl again, which is a notoriously bad RF thing. Well, can we fit in what we had in the old scan? Can we call one of our buddies on another tour and see what they've got and figure that out from there, do our pre-leg work, and it makes it a lot easier.
One thing I want to mention, since we're talking about using frequencies that are already like low power DTV stations, for example, the FCC has made that legal now. So if you're operating indoors and the signal you're receiving is less than 84 dBm, and you can measure that right through Workbench, then you can jump right all over it. And that's one of the nice provisions. I know that not all of our users operate indoor. A lot of times we're at festivals and outdoors and that kind of thing. And then we can get creative with receiver power levels in terms of the powered antennas we're using and what have you. But if you see something that's in the database and you're indoor and it's actually receiving at your receiver below 84, you can use it, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, we do that a lot. We had to do it a lot before with a UR4, but now not so much. But
well, and it's nice too because now you can right click on the TV channel on the main scan screen and take it out there instead of having to go into your list and take it out on the side screen.
Absolutely. So we have a couple open questions here. Do any issues arise between soundcheck and actual show in terms of interference? Do you find things change a lot between when you actually check your mics out and when you actually go on?
For me, the main problem is the opening acts didn't get their transmitters turned off quick enough, or something's gone totally weird. Most of the venues and most of the RF devices around us are on all day or not on all day. There's very few things that turn on later that we've seen recently. Sometimes you'll get a little AM radio station that kicks up their power at night, but you're going to hear that in your DIs and your cables on stage before you hear it in any of the RF stuff. So we really haven't had that much problem. And with Terry having the show link and the network coordinator and all that, it kind of takes care of itself. It's going to warn you, and you're going to switch that frequency before you ever put a device in an artist's hands.
I always do a scan right before, or as soon as the opening act is off, before the act before us is off, I always scan just to double check what's going on, to make sure nothing pops up. And it's just the insurance, but it works for us.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we're getting near the end here. Do you guys have anything else that you'd like to add about the system, or your experience, or tips that you found were very helpful for your workflow?
Well, it's nice to have, in our situation, we do have a couple of extra open receivers, not complete receivers, but we'll have like the 80X4 with a couple of channels not used. That allows Terry to have a complete scanner without having the spectrum manager tied up, and he can scan those frequencies constantly through the show and kind of watch what's going on there. It's one of those little things where it is a luxury, but if you have one, do it, use it.
Cool.
Yeah, that's one thing. I'll throw that in there, Ben. I was doing scans during the show. I still scan during the show, but now I do it on an open channel. But Ben actually hipped us to. I was using the Spectrum Manager during the show to scan when I actually shouldn't have been, because it was looking at Kenny's microphone. So he helped me get squared away on that.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, guys. It's always fun chatting with you, and I love seeing how you're using Axient Digital in your workflow and PSM, and just got your take on the subject, because you guys obviously, you've been there, done that. You know what you're doing. It's a real pleasure, and we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you guys so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank
Great
you.
product.
Yeah, thank you as well.
Keep
Thank you
up
as
the
well
good
for
work.
being here.
Stay safe out there.
We really appreciate your time today, and
Thanks so much, everybody.
thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.